quite glad that you're still with us. So this week, starting yesterday, senior officials of the African Union meeting in Addis Ababa as the AU Permanent Representatives Committee gathered sounded a warning. Unity and shared purpose are no longer choices. They are survival imperatives for a continent confronting overlapping security, political and economic crises. From intensifying conflicts in the Sahel, Sudan, Libya and the Eastern DRC that we just discussed, to the resurgence of coups and contested elections in several regional blocs, Africa's peace and stability are under strain. AU leaders say only solidarity among member states, backed by strong institutions and greater reliance on Africa's own resources, can effectively confront this rising turmoil. But what does solidarity mean in practice? What binds countries like Senegal, South Africa, Ethiopia and Nigeria together beyond ceremonial solidarity? And how does the AU plan to turn consensus into action, whether it's mediating wars, responding to fragility, or defending sovereignty in the face of external pressures? These are not rhetorical questions. They go to the core of Africa's efforts to silence the guns, protect borders, uphold democratic order, and foster economic growth goals at the center of the AU's Agenda 2063 and its peace and security frameworks. Well, our guests for this discussion are Charles Onunaiju, Director of the Center for China Studies in Nigeria. We also have Yemi Fajemisin, geopolitics analyst. I hope I got that right. Thank you so much for sparing the time to talk to us. Okay, for speaking with us. I will start with you, Charles. I mean, there's a lot of conversation around the AU's continuing relevance, but then again, it's to hold some love on the continent. Now they're emphasizing that African unity and collaboration are indispensable to addressing current challenges. One thing is to know, the other, they say, is to tackle, again, to how the AU is viewed. What does this plea signify, though, about the state of continental cooperation today?
Thank you for having me. I just have to start by saying all through our history, we've had to deal with platitudes of this kind of summons, this kind of sermons, but the question remains, the existential challenge for Africa remains transcending some of the institutions, reinventing the institution, interrogating the institution, and asking how relevant, how much are they aligned with the social reality of Africa? How much are they aligned with our historical cause? If we do not align institutions, both institutions, state institutions, and supranational national institutions to the reality on the ground, we continue to we continue to reflect on the challenges in Africa, which have been able to address it in a concrete manner. Yes, the challenge for Africa, unity, consensus, finding a common ground is important. But at the same time, the institution of the state, the national state, have a whole lot of contradictions that have not been resolved, because we have to resolve the nature of the state in Africa, align the institutions of the national state to the actual condition of the people, reflecting their reality. It is only in that context can we begin to address issues of continental or Pan-African unity. If you remember, we've been at this question of Pan-African unity for many years, even before the end of colonial rule. Several conferences, several meetings have been held. Every year, resolutions, issues, concerns are expressed. Yet, what we see is even the worsening of this crisis. You just mentioned the Sahel. You've mentioned the increased cross-border terrorism. You've antisocial behavior in several nation states. In the case of Nigeria, we have to deal with banditry, kidnapping. The question is, have our institutions, the state institutions, as we developed immediately after independence, have they responded adequately? Or is it enough to have these institutions, like we say, democracy, institution of democracy, parliament, judiciary? How much are they aligned with our reality? How much are they in touch with the reality of our existential living? Because if we don't answer this question properly, the idea of continental unity, the idea of security, the idea of stability will continue to be an issue over and over. And what we have seen over time is worsening condition of national instability, sub-regional instability, and even broadly continental instability. You've just spoken about coups, you've spoken about cross-border terrorism, and what has this thing festered for so long, despite several declarations, despite a whole range of ennobling declarations? What have they festered? If we don't address the question of institutions and they are relevant in the existential reality that we confront, we'll be on this for a very long time to come without finding an answer that responds to it in a concrete manner.
Yemi, I mean, I could listen to Charles talk all day. To be honest, I have a bit of fatigue talking about the AU, and that's because I still have the belief that there is so much potential that is untapped. The AU has a mandate. Should it be making calls at this point or aligning with our reality, like Charles said? Because if there seems to be some sort of disconnect, because the powers that the AU is to have, it's not manifest.
Yeah, I agree somewhat with what Mr. Charles has said there. If we want to look at the objective of AU itself, so we know that AU kind of replaced OAU around 2022, and if we look at the few underlining principles that guide it, the AU is all about to make sure that Africa is conflict-free. Second, the AU is all about to make sure there's easy trade flows between African countries, and the AU is also they're keen about Africa speaking with one voice on the world stage. Now, the question is, have they been able to deliver on these things? So it's a mixed reaction, in my view. It's a mixed view. In one way, they've done well in the past. In another way, they've turned a blind eye to so many things that's happened. I'll give you an example. I think around 2004, AU kind of sent troops to Darfur to stop a genocide. So in another way, you look at a case of Chad, for example, when the son of the late dictator Idris Deby died in Chad, the son took over, and AU didn't see any need to sanction that. The argument they had was that it wasn't a coup, although the son took over. So those kind of in excesses. So it's like there's a bit of inconsistencies as to what AU is all about.
Okay, so I'm looking at the time, so I'm gonna just jump in and I'm staying with you, Yemi, to talk about even though I will still go back a bit, but I just wanted to stay with you and talk a bit, if you can, about ways that the AU can be revamped from mere issuing statement, calling for collective action, without any bites. Can the AU regain some sort of strength? And realistically, what role has member states to play in this?
I think they have some tool in the toolbox they can use. I know, for instance, some of the coups that's been happening, that's happened in Burkina Faso and all that, AU suspended those countries. But that's not enough. So we have a problem where some African countries now, because they have more knowledge, more expertise, they've been able to game the whole system. But that doesn't mean AU cannot go further and even issue trade sanctions to some of these countries, like using your word, to bite. there's another example where there are some African countries, like, say, for example, Paul Kagame, Rwanda. Rwanda is a strong AU member. So you have an issue where Paul Kagame on one hand is saying that most African citizens don't trust AU, that there's a bit of a disconnect, and AU is sometimes seen as a dysfunctional organization. The same Paul Kagame is doing a Putin in Congo, in Goma, M23 rebels, practically going into Congo, Eastern Congo. Do you know what their argument is in Eastern Congo? They're saying they want to protect Congolese Tutsi ethnic groups. So you have all these dynamics there where a country is practically just breaking laws. So the question is, how will AU now deal with despots or dictators like that? Those are the kind of complexities they face.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw that question to Charles, actually, because I just wrote it down as you were talking. I wrote, let me read how I read it. But are we not asking too much of the AU, really? And Yemi just concluded that thought for me. When member states pursue divergent foreign policies or bilateral decisions?
Well, I said our fundamental issue is the nature of the nation states in Africa, because except you are able to get the nation states in Africa to work and align with their respective realities, align with their respective histories, and align with the concrete challenge, the material challenge on ground. It is not just to build institutions so that you can valorize your system. It does not matter how it works in reality. You just build it to valorize, to be part of a trend without actually engaging your specific reality. Because I like to say this, no matter how two realities seem identical, they are always distinctive. And if you do not begin to align with the distinctive nature of your reality, you want to flow with the crowd, the world trend of democracy, fine, I have no problem with that. But we can be specific about our democracy by aligning to the practical, critical, concrete challenge, because each country has its own peculiar challenge, which requires a special insight developed from their own specific history and condition to be able to resolve it. So if our supranational national institution as AU should function optimally, there must be a realignment in the nature of the institutions of the various nation states so that the AU can work in sync. As far as the nation states are largely dysfunctional, and largely lacking coordination with the reality of their specific national condition, it will be expecting a magic to want AU to work optimally. However, AU as ECOWAS can only function, in my view, as a fire brigade, putting out the fires whenever it comes calling. But the challenge is not putting out the fires. The challenge is, how do we create a condition in which the fire does not even break out, let alone needing a fireman? So these are the questions at the root.
Charles, so many questions and really few answers. The conversation preceding this one was the escalation of tensions and violence in DRC and DRC, and the escalation particularly of sexual violence against women. And this is one conflict that has lingered for so long. Using it as perhaps a point of contact, as Christians would say, what African solutions do you think have been proposed? The one that was talked about a lot was the recent U.S. brokered peace. I know that the AU has worked in the background for a while, but what concrete solutions should we be looking at to end this particular conflict? And staying with that, earlier I talked about states pursuing their own independent bilateral alignment and all of that. Can states be united? Can the AU call more commitment out of the states? Because without them, just as the states need them, the AU need them for survival.
Yes, like you said, the Congo question is as old as the Congo itself, like you may know, is as old as the Congo itself. And it is believed that an inclusive process involving all Congolese, all ethnic nationality groups, because sometimes one of the biggest challenges we have in Africa is denial. Because we want to flow with the trend, we deny our own reality. And our own reality underscores our own contradiction. Without understanding your contradiction and how it builds and escalates, it gets out of hand. And that is why getting grip of some conflicts in Africa becomes very difficult, because we don't have a grip of how they grew. We don't have a grip of the objective contradiction that exists in their own, that requires a better understanding. Because if you do not understand these contradictions, and in the case of the Congo, you see, an all-inclusive process involving every group, ethnic group, nationality groups, social groups, women groups, these are very important. You know, Congo has, if you remember, Congo had a very important, during the early days in the 90s, the so-called...
Charles, I'm actually looking at time. Sorry to interject. Finding a solution to that conflict, I hope I'm alive to see that situation resolved. But Yemi, let me come to you and get your thoughts on AU's approach to peacekeeping, including African-led missions. As weak as some may allege that they are, they have made some notable efforts in recent times. Is it possible that they can evolve on how they go about peacekeeping, especially when we know that there are resource constraints and then the geopolitical complexities of states doing their thing differently from consensus with the AU?
Yeah, I think they can evolve. Nigeria, for example, used to do a lot of peacekeeping mission back in the day, from Sierra Leone to Liberia. So at the end of the day, it boils down to the commitment, especially from the larger countries. And I think, in my view, it also has to do with making sure the smaller, powerful countries don't encroach or don't invade other smaller countries for their own benefit. If I go back to the example of the Congo, for example, as Mr. Charles said, Congo has been dysfunctional for ages. Historically, from the regime of Mobutu Sese Seko to the Kabila, so everything has been quite dysfunctional. So Rwanda is a smaller country, but very organized in terms of military under Kagame. So because of that, Rwanda has been kind of encroaching in Congo. And one of the reasons why I think Rwanda is doing this is because of the mineral deposits in Congo. We all know Congo is very vast. It's almost the size of the entire Europe. So it's got a lot of gold, so many minerals there. Rwanda doesn't have any resources it exports. Rwanda depends on foreign aid. All of a sudden, we're seeing Rwanda now becoming a big exporter of gold. So you're asking your question, where's that coming from? Most likely, M23, which is a rebel, a proxy. That rebel is a proxy military wing of the Rwandan regime, destabilizing Eastern Congo around the Goma region. So when you have all these small powerful players in the mix, it's one thing to say you want peacekeeping in Africa, organized by powerful African countries, maybe like Nigeria, Senegal, all these things. It's another theory to see other countries destabilizing other countries, even within Africa itself, maybe for their own selfish interest, under the pretext of protecting their own ethnic minorities. So you have all this, it's a cocktail of very complex situation, but I think the peacekeeping, from your question, the peacekeeping mission can work, but it needs to be enforced and it needs to be done in a disciplined manner compared to how it's being done now.
We have here in Africa, we don't even know where to, tackle it from. In 30 seconds each, Charles, your thoughts on this call for more solidarity from the AU at this time?
Okay, let me be very, very clear. If we accept simplistic approaches to African problem by what we consider patching governance here and there, we won't get anywhere. I believe to understand the nature of African challenges, we must understand the nature of contradictions and how it grew. This is not actually a matter of few minutes television interview. It is fundamental for us to appreciate the nature of African challenges arising from the fundamental of and the nature of the contradictions, without which it is difficult to patch up with governance. Patch up with governance, it doesn't matter how honest, how committed, you can't patch up fundamental contradictions with mere issues of governance. So I request, I insist on reinterpreting, reinterrogating the foundations, the infrastructure of our existence by infusing a new thinking, applying an insight that gives us a breakdown of the nature and trajectory of this conflict before we can get hold of them. Without that, we will continue to struggle, but never really getting a complete grip on this crisis.
No, nay for me. Yemi, yours.
One thing I think I need to stress as well is we know the African Union, unlike the European Union, has no powers to enforce treaties. However, they still got a lot of tools they can use in the toolbox for countries that break laws. I don't think it should be acceptable for any countries within the AU to game the system. So what the AU, for instance, AU is okay to suspend countries that's done coups, but sometimes I think they can go further. What Mr. Charles has said is somewhat true. We need to address the underlying issue, like corruption, poverty, and all that. But I think AU can always go further to exercise, it could be even trade sanctions against some of these countries that breaks the law. But at the moment, they've not been doing that, and that's why it's been emboldened. Other countries are emboldened to do whatever they like. So there needs to be some kind of responsibility and discipline in the whole system.
I think leadership and accountability is at the heart. Thank you very much, Charles and Yemi, for speaking with us.